Go.
You start.
Welcome to episode 265 of the All the Book Show, the official podcast of the David A. Hale Public Library. Talk book news, author news, and literary news. I'm Eric Michaels.
I'm Nick Gunning. Eric, today we got a special guest. We've got a special guest. Eric,
Which one does it fall under? The book news, literary news, or author news?
I guess we put it under author news because we've got an author interview coming up that I'm excited about. Eric, travel with me, if you will, back to the year 2017.
Can't even remember.
You can't do it. You can't go back that far. I attended the ALA conference in Chicago, and it was my first ALA conference. I had a great time at this one. Lots of interesting panels, just a lot of cool stuff happening. One of the panels I attended was a DC Comics panel, and one of the headline speakers was author Shea Fontana. Now, my love of the DC superhero girls graphic novels is well documented here on the All the Book Show. I'd read all of those. I think I picked the first one up at the Barnes & Noble in Chicago because I knew that Shea was going to be there. And I'd seen some of the shows with my son, but I hadn't actually read the comics. So I did, and followed him all the way right through to the end. But today is Batman Day. So while I couldn't resist talking about DC superhero girls, our focus for today is going to be Batman Overdrive, which is part of the DC Comics' recent push at doing some more junior and YA level stories about characters that we all know and love. Now, we have Batman Overdrive in our collection, and I checked it out as soon as it came there, and I was really pleasantly surprised by it. I had a good time with it. But anyway, let's get to it. Shea Fontana is a writer for film, television, and graphic novels. Her credits include developing and writing the DC Superhero Girls animated shorts, TV specials, movies, and graphic novels. She's also written for top comic titles including Justice League, Wonder Woman, Batman Overdrive, Catwoman Looney Tunes, and contributed anthology pieces starring Deathstroke and the Teen Titans. Her first nonfiction book is DC Women of Action, which was published by Chronicle in 2019.
Her graphic novels have been New York Times bestsellers and have been honored for Diamond Gem Awards, the Comixology Reader's Pick Award for Best All Ages Graphic Novel 2017, and the 2018 Ringo Award for Best Kids Comic or Graphic Novel. You can find more at SheaFontana.com.
Now,
Nick,
the Ringo Award.
The Ringo Award is not...
It's not about Ringo Starr.
It's not a Ringo Starr doesn't pick his favorite kids comic or graphic novel.
Okay, but
what we're learning with this one.
I think that you're just guessing that. You're just assuming from context clues that it doesn't have anything to do with Ringo Starr. Maybe it does.
It's for kids, but it's also for adults.
I actually quite enjoyed it. Yeah, I was a runner-up for a Pete Best Award, but I had to decline it ultimately. Yeah. Anyway,
sorry.
Are you excited about Batman Day?
Yes, though, I live Batman Day every day in my heart.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
You keep Batman Day in your way and let me keep it in mine.
A lot like the Sesame Street character Elmo, I once wished that Batman Day was every day.
Oh.
I learned my lesson.
That's sweet.
And that it is Batman Day every day is a great.
That's very sweet. Okay,
so
well...
we're still living in that reality.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
All right. Let's get into it. Shea Fontana.
Presents Author Spotlight.
Shea Fontana, thanks for joining us for this special Batman Day episode of the All the Book Show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
My first question here is I'm wondering if you picked up any new skills during this quarantine time.
I don't know about new skills. I did get a hydroponic garden and have a bunch of tomatoes growing right now.
Wow.
That's like the least skilled gardening though you can do, because you basically just set it and make sure it has water, and then it does fine. But I did try to grow a little bit outside in the garden, and that all ends in complete and utter failure. So I guess I did not pick up any actual gardening skills.
Well, I think you're ahead, because we also tried the hydroponics thing and it was a spectacular failure. I don't know what happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was no, it was not good for us. So no, you're ahead. You're ahead in that regard.
Did you have the one where it tells you when you need to refill the water and all of that?
No, ours was very low tech. I mean, we had the light and we had it all set up and just watched it and stayed on it, and it just a few things sprouted but died quickly. So, our streak continues. Neither my wife nor I are any good at gardening. So
Well, I feel very proud of myself now.
yeah, well, good.
I made some tomatoes grow, so
Okay, yeah, that's a
I'm
nice
really
morale
feeling
boost.
great about that.
Definitely.
However, when you stop to consider how much the garden was, and they're like $50 tomatoes for
Right.
each tomato
Yeah.
we've gotten so far.
Well, you'll enjoy them that much more then. It's a satisfaction and a job
Exactly.
well done, right? Well, I'm really excited to talk to you today. I'm excited to talk to you about Batman Overdrive. I mean, I checked it out as soon as our copy came into the library. But before we get into that, I want to go back a few years because I attended your panels at the ALA conference in Chicago in 2017. And I
Oh
mean,
wow!
that whole conference, I had a great time at that whole conference. I thought all the stuff DC did was really fun, and it was just it was a great experience overall. But you said some things in your panel that were really interesting to me, particularly about how you got into comic book writing, because it sounds like you got into it by way of television writing. Is that true?
That is absolutely true. So I went about it in a very backwards way
Yeah.
for most people who get into comic book writing. I started in animation writing. From the time I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer. And in college, I found animation and realized that that allowed me to be the silly, fun person that I wanted to be when I was writing. So I had pursued animation from college on forward. And I guess it was 2014, 2015, as DC Superhero Girls was starting to become an idea that DC was thinking about. They reached out to me to do a pitch on this show and sort of at the overall brand, as it were, because it was a partnership between Mattel, DC, and Warner Brothers. So they were thinking of it as an entire sort of universe, multi-platform kind of thing, where there was animation, there was books, there's toys. Really wanted to take this storytelling in all the different directions. Yeah. But it was all planned from the beginning. So It was planned that there would be the webisodes and there would be the movies. And it really took off from there, and they knew they went into graphic novels as well. So at some point, when they were starting to think of those graphic novels, since I had written all of the other material, they did reach out to me and ask if I would be interested in doing graphic novels. And I had never really thought about comic book writing as a possibility before. So I dove in with the help of some great editors at DC who gave me a lot of scripts to look at. I did the classic thing of, getting the script for a comic book and the comic book and then comparing like side by side what each panel looks like in the finished product compared to what it looks like in the script and how that all works.
Okay.
So it was an interesting experience to get thrown into really the deep end of licensed comics from the get-go, whereas most people, sort of the general career trajectory for a lot of comic book writers is that you start in indie comics and you start into a lot of smaller things, and then you work your way up to licensed comics at DC or Marvel or wherever you may be. So it was a very different sort of experience. And now I am definitely looking to get more into the creator-owned side of comics because I really fell in love with graphic novel writing from that and doing Batman as well. So it was, I think comic book writing and graphic novels are, just one of the most fun and exciting types of writing. Yeah. And right now, the boom that they're having in the world, it's really just great to see how interested kids are in graphic novels and see the success of graphic novels that's currently happening.
Yeah. Well, I think they inspire reading in a way that, regular picture books or, like junior level chapter books just don't tend to. I see that in my own son who's 6, he really gravitates towards the graphic novel format. And I've just seen his reading improve so quickly because of that. So I think it's popular, but it's also really crucial, I think, in developing a new generation of readers, which is so important. Now, it seems to me that would be kind of a daunting prospect moving over to comic books because, like you said, you're coming at it sort of from the top because you're starting with really top tier characters, Wonder Woman, Batgirl. I mean, the works. You've got the cream of the crop. So was that intimidating for you?
Not in that way. It was really exciting and inspirational to be able to jump into those characters. And it is nice with licensed characters that you do have a basis to work from. So it's not, you're still staring at the blank page to begin with, but you know who the characters are. You know a little bit about what you're getting into. So it's not as much creating the entire world from scratch.
Yeah.
But it was really, we had such a great team on that, and it was really fun. And always, if I ever needed help, there were editors at DC who were instantly willing to, stop and chat about anything that was a difficulty within the story. So it was really, I never felt daunted by it in any way, but it was just really exciting to be able to jump in and do it.
I assume that while there's certainly similarities, like you said, you're familiar with the characters, you've been scripting them on screen for a long time at this point, but it must flex some different muscles when you're working in this medium. How do you approach that as a writer?
I would say actually animation and graphic novels have a ton in common from a writing perspective, because both are so visually driven. So it really takes a person who is thinking visually. I think there's a lot more of a difference between like writing animation and writing a prose novel, because that's just a very different space. But in both animation and graphic novels, you are essentially telling the story through pictures and through the visuals. Of course, dialogue helps, but you want the visuals to carry a lot of the weight of the story. So I think there's a lot of similarities in that way, but it's also, there are some obviously strengths in the graphic novel that you don't get as much in animation. I think you can get into the characters' heads a lot more in a graphic novel. You have those, the caption boxes, you have the sort of narration devices that allow you to get a little bit more of that flair of what's going on inside the character, where generally in animation we stay away from sort of voiceover and all that kind of those techniques that allow you to get just more of an inside glimpse of the character. Though there's certainly a lot of artsy things that go on in animation, I think you can be a bit more abstract in graphic novels with the way things are portrayed, and filling that the more kind of abstract artsiness of the graphic novel and the visuals as compared to a strict animated cartoon where it is pretty much, there is certain fantasy bits, but it's not necessarily as ethereal or heady in that way.
Okay. Now, you said that from the start, the DC Superhero Girls was intended to be a whole, a brand upon itself with all these different, different mediums, different toys. I mean, I know I step on the Legos all the time, so I know they're very popular. But up until this point, there really hadn't been, at least if there was, I missed it. But there hadn't really been a concerted effort to market these characters specifically to young girls, and I think that's one of the things that DC Superhero Girls was able to accomplish so well. Is, sure, I think it probably has that slant, but I think that it has such a broad appeal, that I think it's been really successful in that way. What were you hoping to accomplish working with those characters with that in mind?
I mean, really, from my perspective, it's creating just great content with females in the lead, females as the heroes of their own story, having these women characters that age down to teenage girls, and showing them be the proactive protagonists that are taking charge. So often, even in some of the more female-centric, if you would call it that, comic books, the girl characters and the women characters kind of get relegated to secondary roles. So we really wanted to take these characters who, Wonder Woman obviously has her own comic book, Batgirl has had her own comic book, but a lot of these other characters, they were one member in a team of 5, and they were the only girl among those 5 characters kind of thing. So we really wanted to bring them together and bring out their strengths and give them stories where they were really the central hero of the stories. Not that there weren't boy characters around. We were absolutely, we wanted to make sure that there were plenty of boy characters represented as well. But it really was just looking at the world and the storytelling that we're doing from the perspective of these female characters. So when writing it, I never was like, I'm specifically making something for girls.
Sure.
I knew it was something that I would have personally liked as a kid, but it wasn't. It wasn't from the perspective of we are doing this specifically for girls or only for girls. I think great storytelling is going to work across, all genders and all people, as long as it holds up and has, that heart and the action and the things that we love about superheroes. So I mean, from a toy perspective, there is still a very, solid divide between the pink aisle and the blue aisle. So there was certainly those conversations that were happening in that realm, because that is how toys are defined. But from an overall content perspective, it wasn't like we were specifically, targeting just the girl audience. We really wanted to go for a broad kid audience, knowing that girls have not had a lot of representation, have not often been able to see themselves as portrayed as the hero in a lot of previous superhero storytelling. And so just making sure there was an emphasis on that, but it wasn't a gendered look at our audience.
I think it accomplishes that balance really well, because it really does. I mean, they're just fun, exciting stories, no matter who you are or where you're coming from. And I like what you're saying about, sure, you've got your marquee characters, but pulling some of these more obscure characters and bringing them in. I think Big Barda is a perfect example, which is, sort of a deep cut into like Jack Kirby era comics. So to bring her out forward like that, I thought was a fun thing to do. And, because the series is set in its own continuity and, you're working sort of from a different, world than mainstream DC Comics. I just wondered if there was anything that you were really wanting to do that you were told, oh, no, you can't do that. Or if you had flexible options.
It was really very, very broad. And as I said, everyone was super supportive of the writer kind of vision and what we were going for. From the beginning, I think, collectively as a group, we wanted to avoid too much Batman and Superman, just because they tend to take over the things that they're involved in. So we did want to make sure that the focus remained really on our girl characters here. The one thing that I specifically ever got like actual pushback on was in the original Bible, the show Bible, Lobo was the vice principal instead of Grodd, which I thought was pretty funny. But for some reason, they were obviously Lobo is not exactly a G-rated character in the comics, but they were hesitant about putting him in that role, and we went with Grodd instead, which I think is hilarious because Gorilla Grodd in a blazer and bow tie is just a funny image. And then we did end up bringing Lobo back in as one of the students from a competing school in that storyline. But that was the only thing I specifically didn't understand exactly why there was pushback about. Of course, there's a lot of collaboration and there are notes along the way. But that was the only thing that was kind of off the table from in the initial pitch Bible that I did.
Interesting. Now, as far as your process goes, I mean, you clearly, you're a creative and busy working writer, and I'm always fascinated to learn how people manage the concept of having to be creative on command. I mean, are there times when you're just not feeling it, but you're pushing up on a deadline, or you've got something like, all right, I have to do this, because that seems to me like it'd be really hard to do that.
I think that's the difference between sort of the craft of it and the muse of it. So I think really as a working writer, you have to have such just solid story craft skills and be able to rely on that toolbox of, especially now at this point in my career, it is certainly a lot easier for me than it was early on, because you don't have that sort of like sixth sense knowledge, as you call it, of how a story works, and where's the low point, and where do we have the change, where's the art come in, those kind of things, which I've written. I think I've worked on about 500 episodes
Wow.
of TV at this point. So I feel like I can pretty much dive into a story and know at least like the basic kind of structural things. There is certainly technique that just comes in on, making a joke work, making a setup and a punchline work. What is the silly cutaway that you look at? Where's the visual punchline? Those are all really things that you can learn. Some of them are hard to learn from books, and things that you really have to learn by doing them over and over again. There's a lot of what I just said. I'm like, I don't know how I would explain that or teach that to someone else. It's just something you start picking up and filling out along the way and starting to understand how those things work. But certainly people who are smarter than I have written books about those kind of things, and written about how to do joke writing or sitcom writing and those kind of things. So I think there's a lot of that is just the craft of being a writer that you have to separate from sort of our romantic idea of, a writer just waiting on a beach to get inspiration for an idea and then running off and writing a novel. I don't think for most writers, especially working writers, that's how it works. It is, just honing those skills and those muscles of being able to come up with a premise, or look at, the basic essence of a show. If you're going into any sort of TV writing room and thinking like, okay, here are the characters. What kind of trouble can I get those characters in? What do those characters want? How do you start breaking those down into stories that you can just churn out as, it's a work. It's not just the fun or the artsiness and the creativity of writing. It's putting in the work and using the craft and skills that you gain along the way to make it work.
Okay. Let's talk for a minute about Wonder Woman: Heart of the Amazon, because you'd been writing DC Superhero Girls for many years, and then I'm wondering how the difference was here when you're switching over to writing for the mainstream Wonder Woman line in continuity. Was that an exciting process for you? Did you have a good time on that piece?
Yeah, it was really, really fun. It was sort of in the middle of my DC Superhero Girls run. They asked me if I would be interested in doing the regular Wonder Woman, and of course I was. You can't say no to Wonder Woman.
No, you can't.
And I definitely had a leg up on the character from having done DC Superhero Girls for so long and, been immersed in the character of Diana. So I wouldn't say from a process perspective that it was that much different. It was thinking of the character now, what are her adult problems as compared to her teenage problems, and how does that change? But I think, from the essence of the character DNA, Diana's always, she's struggling and striving for justice for the world and trying to bring peace. Her primary motive, it's not about, putting people in jail for a long time. It's trying to bring peace to a situation and figuring out, what is the sort of restorative justice angle that we can address the situation with. So it was a really fun time to work on that title. It was right as the Wonder Woman movie was coming out. My first issue came out, so it was like the summer of Wonder Woman.
All eyes on Wonder Woman at that point, definitely. I've spoken with other authors about how it can sometimes be tricky switching writing for demographics, flipping that switch in your mind of this is for an older crowd and how that affects your writing. Is that something you struggled with here, or was it a natural transition?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I've never thought of it in that framing before. It was definitely exploring a different side and getting into some of the more, I would say, philosophical issues of being a superhero than you would do in more of a kid-oriented sort of story. I wouldn't say that it was necessarily a struggle to think of it that way.
Okay.
But yeah, it was an interesting challenge. It was definitely a different sort of process going in with the artist, and really looking at more adult sort of themes.
Okay. Well, let's, it's Batman Day after all, so why don't we zoom into some Batman Overdrive here. Can you tell me how this one came about?
Yeah, so this was about the time DC Superhero Girls was super successful. I think it was DC was looking at the kids and young adult graphic novel market, which obviously in the past decade, particularly so in the past 5 years or so, has just skyrocketed in an amazingly immense way, that if you told people in the 90s, like, every kid at school was going to be reading all these graphic novels, you'd like, no. Are they about superheroes? What are you talking about? Graphic novels that are, kind of these other sort of stories that we didn't used to think about in the comic book format. But obviously, they really took over, and DC was launching its whole new line of graphic novels for, kids and young adults. So they reached out to me to ask what character I would be interested in. And having done, I think by the time I ended on DC Superhero Girls, I had done something like 90 shorts, 3 movies, a TV special, 8 graphic novels.
Wow.
So I had done a lot of these girl characters. And the one character that I didn't get to write in the DC sandbox was Batman. And Batman was really, my first love in comics. I think for many of us who were kids in the early 90s, Batman, the animated series, was just such a huge influence on my life and my tastes. And that experience of watching that really is what turned me on, I think, in a lot of ways, to animation and that sort of storytelling. So I pitched this Batman idea that was really the origin of the Batmobile, as well as, those first sprinklings of Bruce Wayne becoming Batman as a teenager. And they went for it. So that's how that one came about.
It's an interesting take, and I've got to be honest, I was skeptical about. I was like, "Oh, is this a Batman origin?" Because I've seen his parents die so many times at this point, And but picking up this book, I was impressed with the way you managed to tell that story with a completely different lens. I think. The way it focuses on Bruce sort of coming to terms with this, the way he's channeling his energies into, he's focusing on his dad's old car, he's focusing on his parents' killers. We've also never really seen that sort of, teenage rebellion between him and Alfred. You've always just, for the most part, been given a pretty idealistic version of what that would be like. So I thought that... I really think the strength of the book are finding new things in a story that we've seen a lot. You mentioned Batman the Animated Series, but I wondered if you were drawing on any specific era of Batman as sort of a guide. I, of course, noticed the nods to Adam West with the Crusader 66 car.
There wasn't anything specific, especially for the middle grade and YA novels that DC is doing. Those are all out of continuity. And so I wouldn't say that there was like a specific era of Batman that I was drawing on, other than I think subconsciously everything I would do with Batman is somehow married to Batman the Animated Series, because that was so formative for my brain and formative for my idea of Batman. But it was... I was really always... The relationship between Alfred and Bruce is in many ways like so bizarre.
Yes.
When you think of him as an adult, like, it's his butler, and he kind of treats him like a butler, but also it was his guardian from the age of 10 forward. So it's an odd sort of relationship that they have, but obviously without Alfred, I don't think Bruce Wayne would be a very good Batman, because he really relies on Alfred so much to, be his support system. So, I just really wanted to explore that relationship, and, this idea in these interceding years that we don't know much about what Bruce Wayne was up to.
Yeah.
Obviously, as someone who had this, and it was like a struggle of like, oh, I don't want to do this whole parent dying thing. Like everybody's done this in every origin story of Batman ever. We've covered it, but if your parents were killed in front of you when you were a kid, obviously that's the most formative moment of your life, right? So I think you do have to address that within the context of any Batman story, I think. So I wanted to kind of find, like, you know, what is the emotional sort of ramifications of that on a teenager, you know, where obviously in this story, Batman Overdrive, Bruce is pretty angry. He's really, you know, he's dealing with a lot. He's not gone through all of his stages of grief, we'll say. He's kind of stuck on angry and trying to figure out what this world is, and his world feels hostile to him. It feels like not a safe place. So it really is him coming to terms with this and finding that safety within Alfred, and recognizing that Alfred is, you know, basically his safety net, and he's going to be the one that's there for him, and accepting that, and, you know, being able to evolve a bit. I think early on in my process with Batman and with the story, I wanted to bring out a slightly more hopeful version of Batman. A sort of Bruce Wayne that might have a chance at being happy. I think there's a lot of brooding Bruce Wayne stories where, you know, he is struggling so much with his personal life and, you know, with his relationships, and, you know, what could we have done when he was a teenager to help him, you know, open himself up a bit more. And, you know, I think most Bat stories are loner Bruce Wayne learns that he needs the Bat family kind of thing. So we're certainly doing that here, but I think we've found another angle at it, and, you know, just the fun of Bruce Wayne as a teenager as well was really exciting to get into.
Well, I agree, and I mean, I think that comes across on the page, and I think, you know, as you're talking about him coming to terms with all this stuff, dealing with, you know, the cards he was dealt, I think using his dad's car as a place to sort of channel his aggressions and his energies, like having that be something that, like, okay, he can control this, he can work on this, there's a beginning and end. I think that makes sense, just psychologically, that would be something that he really needed to sort of move on. And, you know, there's always that moment in any sort of early Batman where he has to be like, well, I guess I'll dress like a bat and go fight crime, you know. And I think what you were able to do with, you know, having it be about the car and hiding his identity and all that made that transition a lot more, like, reasonable, you know, than it tends to be in other things. I also want to talk about one of your original characters here for a minute. So let's talk Mateo Diaz, who takes on the persona of Doc a little later in the book. I was interested that you didn't choose to use one of the, you know, established, like, Bruce friends, like Tommy Elliott, or even like a Harvey Dent situation. I think it serves the story much better to have this original character. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about, you know, what went into your mind about making this character.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Mateo has been one of my favorite characters to write. And really getting into it, I did look at some of the characters that existed, and no one felt like the right fit for that. I really wanted Mateo to be the counterpoint to Bruce's armor that he's put on to keep everyone out. And really, he just has the warmest, friendliest heart. He does not get Bruce's kind of social cues that he wants to be left alone. He's just there, and he's really just this incredibly kind and empathetic kid. So it was really fun to get into that character and bring something new to the Batman world.
Well, it's a nice variation on how you usually see those relationships, because often, like you said, Bruce will do his little thing where he's like, oh, I'm sad and I want to be alone. Where in Mateo's response to it, I liked, because it was more kind of like, yeah, okay, whatever, man. You know, he was just kind of like, chill about it, letting him do his own thing. And I thought that dynamic was really interesting. And I wondered if there were more plans for that character beyond this book.
I would love to write that character again. There are not currently any sequel plans, but maybe one day in the future.
That was my next question, because it really, the way it ends, to me, I'm ready for volume 2. I mean, I think it's kind of begging for a sequel. So hopefully we'll see that again. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to write it.
Well, if you're down for it, I want to do a quick Batman Day lightning round where I ask you some Batman questions. You just give me the first answer you got.
Okay.
Are you ready? Okay. What is your earliest memory of Batman?
I would. My first memory, I was going to say, is Batman the Animated Series, but it probably the Batman '89 movie was
okay.
Before that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Who's your favorite on-screen Batman?
Ooh, my favorite on-screen Batman.
Such a tough one. Sounds like Keaton was the first Batman.
You know what? I loved his portrayal of Batman, because it was before this kind of super jacked up superhero type that we are now like. And you watch a superhero movie and it's the biggest, strongest guy you have ever seen in the world. Like just impossible standards. I feel like Keaton's Batman, there was sort of a, obviously while he was still Batman and still tough and all that, there was like a believability to it that you saw like some of these actors that play superheroes walking down the street, you'd be like, oh my God, they're a superhero.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't see and be like, oh, that's a guy who runs a corporate board somewhere, probably.
So I like the believability there. I think that is probably my favorite Batman.
All right. Who is your favorite member of the Bat family outside of Batman?
Well, Batgirl, obviously.
That's what I thought you'd say. All right, I'll allow it. Favorite Batman villain?
As a kid, I remember liking the Riddler a lot.
Oh, yeah.
As a person who tried to write the Riddler in a couple of the DC Superhero Girls episodes, it is so hard to come up with good riddles. So I really enjoyed the Riddler, and I like the conceit of the riddles. But I will say, from a writing perspective, it is very difficult to come up with a good riddle.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. If you could write any Bat character in a spin-off, so not Batman, not Batgirl, but a different Bat character, who would it be? Villain or good guy?
I would say Harley Quinn.
Okay.
I'm going to count her still as a Bat character.
Yeah.
Because that's where she is, even though she's now got plenty of her own things going on.
She does, yeah.
But she was my favorite character to write in DC Superhero Girls. And she just has a kookiness to her that it's so fun to write her.
Yeah, well, she's certainly been having a moment these last couple years, where she's suddenly become top tier in a way that I doubt Batman the Animated Series expected that character would ever be.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I wonder if you've got any new projects that you could give us a little tease on, people to look forward to.
Ooh, there's a lot of things I can't talk about.
Understood.
So pay attention to my Twitter is Shea Fontana. So keep an eye out for announcements of new things. I have been working on a Polly Pocket animated series, and that is currently available on Netflix with new seasons coming soon.
All right. Well, Shea, thanks so much for talking to you today on this special Batman Day episode. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
What a fun interview.
Yeah, we had a good time. I truly have never, like both my wife and I, we just cannot grow things in a garden. I don't know why. I don't know why, but just not a skill that either one of us have.
Well,
so what are you going to do?
Your wife Hillary notoriously has the anti-green thumb.
Yeah, whatever the opposite of a green thumb is, I guess. Yeah, I'm right there with her.
If Darkseid was looking for the anti-life equator, it might be in Hillary's thumb.
It's possible. To fail at a hydroponics garden, I think was it was a bitter pill for both of us to swallow. But I'm glad that Shea had better luck than me.
Kendra, every time I buy flowers, I feel so guilty because it's just like, well, you're coming home to die.
Yep.
So,
do you think that Lobo would have made a good vice principal?
Listen, I like the idea, but I can totally understand why DC's like,
oh, you're right. Wow.
No way.
You're taking the side of the man on that one. Jeez.
It's just Lobo. I love the idea of Lobo being like, get out of my office.
Yeah.
But like, he is also such a volatile character.
I like
you
to
know,
think about Lobo
he
getting
hasn't
his
been
master's
used.
in education. You know what I
You
mean?
think,
I
you
like
think
to
he's going through that?
I
that
like to
process.
think about that. Yeah,
And
about what
only
his course
and
work.
getting the vice principal job,
Yeah.
not the principal job.
Yeah, boy,
not
the main man
superintendent.
wouldn't have liked that. No, you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So,
Grodd's a solid choice, though. Grodd's a solid choice.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. Grodd is also just. I mean, I guess that's the thing is you put a villain in
Yeah.
the vice principal
You
role.
got
That
to.
makes sense.
You
Yeah.
have to. Yeah.
Lobo's that teacher that like after school you go to like you go to like the gas station.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, I'm just gonna run in to get something, and he's coming out with the brown paper bag.
Yeah.
It's like, oh hey, how was school today?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, and instead of like baguettes sticking out, it's just extra large Slim Jims, you know, coming out
Yeah.
of the top of that
Yeah.
bag. Anyway.
Yeah. Hey, I guess as a gym teacher maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
He seems like the he seems like the student who graduated years ago and just keeps showing up.
Yeah.
And is just always like working on his motorcycle out back after high school gets
That's
out.
kind
He's
of how they eventually
what's going
did.
on?
Yeah, that's pretty much how they did use Lobo eventually in
Yeah.
that series when he's like, she mentioned from another school he comes in. But
Yeah.
yeah, you do still get that. Another Batman the Animated Series fan, so right there, you know,
Yeah.
she's coming from good pedigree.
Yeah,
so
we're
that's
many.
good. I've often wondered because you know with the new Rob Pattinson movie that's coming out, the whole thing about somebody cracking the Riddler's code, you know, like there was just a little. Have you heard about this? There was just like a little blip in the trailer of a riddle, and somebody went through and actually cracked that code. But I've often thought like somebody is crafting these riddles, you know?
Yeah, that's why he's not really featured on the Batman animated series. They said it's just a very difficult character to
Yeah.
like do in an animated series that
Yeah.
tends to lean more actiony.
Yeah,
So there's really only like one great Riddler episode out of like 3
right.
in that animated series, and it's the one where he's like maybe reforming.
Yeah.
So yeah, Riddle. I often think that like, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could write Batman? And be like, no, one, Batman's supposed to be the smartest person ever.
Yeah.
So that would be, I would just look like an idiot writing him. Be like, I don't know what this blood is. And then 2, you could just never use the Riddler. I
Yeah.
could never use him because
Yeah.
I'd just be like, riddle me this, Batman. Should you take a left turn?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, no.
Well, anyway, the book is Batman Overdrive, which is in stores or your local library right now, and it's a good time. It's a good time, you know. Teenage Bruce Wayne, like I said in the interview, I mean, it's a great lens to sort of channel Bruce Wayne's mania into like obsessing over this car and trying to solve his parents' murder mystery. So it's a fun book, and you know, the strength of it lies in taking a story that we've heard a lot, focusing on completely different angles of it, and really telling a unique story within the confines of characters and situations that we love. So I highly recommend the book, so go out and check that out. You can also catch Polly Pocket on Netflix, as she was mentioning, and you can...
Polly Pocket. I mean, those tiny little figurines
Yeah.
and those little pocket things. I mean, it was Polly Pocket and what was his
Mighty
name?
Max.
It was Mighty Max.
Yeah.
Gosh, and they both had anime. At least
Oh, yeah.
Mighty Max did.
It was big business.
Everywhere. And then like McDonald's or Burger King were like, come to the store and you get a Mighty Max or Polly Pocket, but it was even smaller
Yeah,
than the
tinier.
ones you get in the store. This was the mini Polly Pocket.
exactly. Yeah,
and it was you just had them on that little rail, but you just sit there and do it for hours. What was wrong with me?
I never did either Polly Pocket or Mighty Max. I mean, I know they were super hip. I was all about Micro Machines, though. If you want to
Sure,
talk things
okay.
that were mini, I mean, Micro Machines. How was there not a Micro Machines show? Right?
I don't know.
I should have asked Shea Fontana about that. She should get on it. Don't you think?
Yes, I'm double checking because that seems impossible that there wasn't. But
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like there was a
I
Micro
know.
Machine show.
Well, I know. What are you gonna do?
Crazy.
What are you gonna do? Our thanks again to Shea Fontana, and I encourage you to go check out Batman Overdrive, watch Polly Pocket on Netflix, and hey, DC Superhero Girls is always a good time. So if you haven't read the graphics or seen the shorts or the movies, check them out.
You can find more at SheaFontana.com or by following her on Twitter at SheaFontana.
That's right. Eric, happy Batman Day.
Happy Batman Day, Nick. I'll see you tomorrow for more Batman Day.
All right. So long, everybody.